Hi, I'm Tom Dixon, and I'm going to be judging the Challenge 2, the Body and Blade, the Universal Language, Skating Language, whatever you want to call this. I think this is a really important challenge, and it's also a difficult one. It's difficult because probably more than any other challenge, the quality of the skater decides the quality of the choreography. So in other words, your choreography is only as good as the skater that's skating it. And this is because the core soul of the skating technique is really what's so important here. I wanted to sort of explain to you how I think about skating skills. I've talked and worked with Janet Lynn over the years and learned how she approached her skating, and she said that one of her coaches that taught her the compulsory figures, Pierre Brunet, used to say that skating is like sailing. And that probably doesn't make any sense at first, but the more I thought about it, it completely made sense to me. So I brought a skate and a sail boat. This is my daughter's first skate and my son's toy sailboat when he was 3. The thing that they have in common is that they have a precarious edge. A sailboat actually has an edge, it's not flat, and a skate has an edge. They're very thin, and they both carry weight. Of course, in the skate we have to put our body, which creates the weight, but the boat has a lot of weight on top of it. So what's so important here is a sense of balance, and I think that's the key issue to skating. On the ice we have either an inside or an outside edge, and how we place our weight, the center of our body, and our balance determines where we're going to go on this blade. Likewise, the sailboat has a sense of balance, and the beautiful metaphor is that when the sailboat catches the wind, it moves effortlessly, and that's exactly the adjectives we want for our skating. I believe the core of the skating has to be effortless before you can do anything or say anything with it, because that means the body is in perfect balance and you're getting your flow from your edge. But the thing that made so much sense to me about the boat is that I felt like the hips are extremely important in skating. Over the years I've looked at skating and I've thought, oh, why does the skater look so solid on their edges? And it is the hips, and like the boat has sides that do not move. And to me this exemplifies the fact that when we glide on an edge, our hips must be perpendicular to the print. This is what creates the stability. And like a boat, we can only go forward, and I suppose the sailboat could go backwards, but we can't go sideways. And another nice thing is that the sailboat has a mass, which is like our spine, our center coming up, and our head on top. And regardless of what we do with our torso, that alignment has to stay, much like the sailboat's sails can twist and alter how the boat moves through the water, but the body alignment is much the same. So, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it made a lot of sense to me. One of the things as a skating choreographer you have to really analyze and accept are the fact that we ride edges. And the first question you have to ask is, how many of them are there? And the fact is that there's 8. That means there's 8 rockers, 8 counters, 8 3-turns, 8 brackets, 8 loops. That also means that if you think about how turns rotate from one circle to another, whether you rotate with a curve or against, that mohawks rotate like 3 turns and brackets on 8 edges. So there's 8 mohawks that rotate like 3 turns, 8 mohawks that rotate like brackets. Some of them may be crazy and nearly impossible to do, but you can, if you're really good, work with those. And conversely, Choctaws rotate like counters and rockers, so that means there's 8 Choctaws that rotate like rockers, and there's 8 Choctaws that rotate like counters. Twizzles, same thing. You initiate rotation from one of 8 edges. So the minute you think in those terms, multidimensional skating becomes automatic. To equally master those, both as a choreographer and as a skater, are essential to elevate your language. You know, this is what defines our language on ice. This is what separates it from dance. The other thing I want to address is that it's not languages I consider universal are music and dance and skating. They all have their particulars, but the aesthetics and the end result are all very universal. You know, there's a point in the mastering of skating where you also must master dance. There's a whole language and vocabulary in dance that we can bring to the ice, that we must bring to the ice, but make it adhere to the art of skating. The first piece I'm going to talk about is by Adam Blake, and it's called Prese en Envol, and it was performed by Dale. And I love this piece of music. The problem for me is I felt like there wasn't a connection of the blade to the body. I really just kept wanting to see a greater range of edge depth. And the difficult thing is you guys run show ice and it's smaller, but sometimes you have to work even harder on really how you pattern and how you utilize the smaller ice to give the illusion that you're covering more space. And I felt choreographically that you needed to allow the edges, the 8 edges we talked about, and all the vocabulary that comes out of those 8 directions to sort of take more importance in this. There was some interesting use of arms moving through space and dropping to the ice, but I really didn't feel a connection with the blade. I felt movement and expression from the arms and the head, but I really have to say at no time was there a connection where I felt the blade was emanating up through the body and almost making that stuff happen. So again, I think this could be a much better piece if you'd really think about that and translate that into the movement for the skater. I have to say the one part I really liked that I thought you were in the right direction was that, and you repeated it twice in the same place, it was the forward left outside 3 on the bum, 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 and I love the way you sped up the 3 turn and then suspended the arm after that. To me that was a perfect combining of using skating vocabulary, using dynamics, using how you move through space, all in the same thing, and I thought it beautifully phrased the music, and the music phrased it, so it was all coming together. But I'm afraid other than that one section, I'd have to say that there was not a whole lot of that. So keep going in that direction. I thought that was great, but because of what I said, I'd have to give this 1 star. The next piece would be by Irene Chambers, L'Horloge qui Régit, and that was performed by Irene. And I thought there was some nice usage of rhythmical steps in here, although in saying that I didn't feel like the rhythmical steps incorporated the whole body. I found them very foot oriented, which tended to make them on the laborious side. So think about when you're using things like chassés, that really the flow and momentum has to come from the center of the body where you hold your weight. The weight translates down into the blade, and that almost makes the foot move, so that you can also get a greater depth of emotion, nuance, and sort of sublimation of your knee. I want to feel that you use the action of your knee more for some of the pulse, rhythm, and phrasing of those rhythmical moments. The best section of this was when you really pared it down to its more simpler form. I call it the Tai Chi section, where she slowed down and did some very slow movements and a reverse ina. I thought that had a nice control of edge, and it also had the best connection, I thought, to the music. The problem is watch the steps that you use. Right after that, I felt you used some crossovers and they felt a bit choppy, so it lost that magic for me. And then it was followed by a wonderful spiral, I think it was. So be careful that you don't treat crossovers just like crossovers. Like, I feel like when I see crossovers, I don't want to know they're there because they're so in tune with the music, or they're deep into the ice enough that they just sort of melt into everything else. So I got the feeling that it was sort of like patchwork. This part really skated and had a connection to the music, this part didn't. If you could sort of refine your movement and get that to be more cohesive, I would get a more universal feel for it. But because I didn't, I had to give this a 1.5. So keep working on that, and I hope you saw the slow part that I'm talking about. Sometimes simple is good, and go with that. And when you do create more complex rhythms and steps, obey some of those rules that made the simple stuff flow and work. The next piece is by Garrett Kling, and it was called Move On, and that was performed by Nicolette. And I thought this was a daring piece. It's a difficult piece of music to interpret, and I thought Nicolette did a really good job with what she had. Had some really good energy and rhythmical usage. I thought she moved really well, and some of those kind of funky, quirky rhythmical passages with the humming and the clicking of the voice, and I thought Garrett, you did a really good job with that. What I would say is that in using the language of skating and the 8 edges we talked about, it will give your patterning automatically a different dimension, and using of multi-directional skating, is I felt that it really pretty much went up and down the ice, with maybe one or two exceptions. And so think about how 8 edges and so many ways to rotate affect the pattern, you know, naturally, by letting patterns go somewhere maybe that you didn't expect. Even though there was some great movement, I kind of started to expect that it was going to go up and down. And again, I love Nicolette's energy and her performance. I love when she let her hair down. I kind of wished at that point that her skating would have loosened up and opened up and got rounder and maybe a little wilder. And maybe some use of some more tricks. I think she was a good enough skater that you could have invented some tricks utilizing edges. You know, really press and pull on edges and see where it might take you up in the air, down on the ice. In that respect, I found it a little on the safe side. So again, some really good phrasing, nuancing, but really think about edges and pattern. I thought you really were heading in the right direction in the very beginning, where I thought you were really getting the nuance of the feeling of the humming of the music, and used some really good edges, and more importantly, the edges created the phrasing and became the music. I found that as the music got a little funkier, that the language of skating kind of diminished a little. Again, there was a couple more times when Nicolette did some really nice edge work, and it really followed the melodic line of the music. But try and think in the rhythmical sections, especially as a source of variation, to explore with how you can take some of the 8 edges of skating and all these turns and steps that we talked about and sort of funkify them and use body isolation on them. So I don't get this feeling of it skates, then it dances, and it skates, because to me that sort of makes a disconnect between the body and the blade. So I basically wanted to give this a 2, but I thought Nicolette did such a great job with it, and I thought she was spot on with her execution, completely musical. So I gave it a 2.5. The next piece is Felicia Beck's. It was called Stages of Grief. And Felicia, I thought this was a really nice piece. It's difficult when you do the choreography yourself. Sometimes you get immune to yourself. I know I do. Sometimes I'll start to do things for myself and I'll think, oh my God, Tom, you've done that for a long, long, long time, come up with something new. I thought you had a lot of interesting things. The problem I had with this piece is I didn't feel the grief. There were moments, but I felt in maybe thinking of the stages of grief that the initial part lacked depth of movement. Think about when you're even going slow, that maybe the movement is slow, but it's not weak. Think about how you oppose in space, use oppositional force, like the depth of a knee plie opposing the stretch of the spine, or one arm is reaching this way and the other's reaching that way, and so that I get a greater feeling of resistance. Think of moving through water versus moving through peanut butter. So that in the stages of grief you get life experiences. I felt like it was great that you tackled this, but I felt the end result was that maybe you haven't had the life experiences, or you didn't know how to translate them into movement. There were some really great parts where I felt like, as a skater, you used some good language. That part where the music starts to build and you do the left forward, outside rocker, cross, edge pull, back inside counter, twizzle, throw up of the arms, and that was a moment where I thought you were with the music and the music was you, and I didn't feel it was because you're trying to show 1 foot skating. I thought it came naturally and just didn't have to try too hard. The dynamics equaled the emotion, and because you're a talented skater, that really worked. Again, going back to the parts that died down, I felt they needed to, even though the music is slow and maybe you were at a lower stage of grief, that you needed to vary your speed and pressure on your blade. I almost got the feeling, especially in the beginning, that you were maybe marking it. And I know that's not the intention, but be careful when you're talking about dynamics. Sometimes things can be slow but very strong, and conversely things can be quick in tempo and weaker in energy. So really play with that stuff so that you don't get the typical result, which is slower movement has weaker energy and bigger music and bigger energy movement has higher impact. I wanted to see almost the opposite with this. So work on that. I thought if you worked on the execution of this just choreographically, it could have been a greater piece. It was nice, but because of that sort of lack of dynamics, especially in the beginning, I gave it a 3.